This is the Nutters Club, thanks to New Zealand On Air on Newstalk ZB.
Good evening and welcome to the Nutters Club. Normally, we would have had a song playing there, but I guess we didn't pay the royalties this week, so we'll just have to do it. I would have done a rendition, but I'm not really known for my singing prowess at this time of the night. Anyway, my name's Hamish, Coleman-Ross, and welcome along to the Nutters Club, the show that talks about your mental health every Sunday night and Monday morning. A very warm welcome to you wherever you might be listening tonight. Now, as he has to join me most weeks, it's by order of the courts, and so it's happy to have him here in the studio with me. He's my psychotherapist. He's your psychotherapist, Kyle McDonald. Good evening. Do you want to sing the theme song?
No, I don't think that would help our listenership at all. I think I'm probably scare people out of their beds.
Well, you don't know until you try. It could be a hidden talent.
Be very well hidden.
Okay. Well, I'm sure we'll have the song back next week. Maybe
We'll find it.
Okay. We have got a guest tonight, which is great, and he's come all the way from Taranaki. But the place Taranaki, I don't know if you know, Kyle, but it was created so the hardcore had somewhere to live.
Well, that makes sense. They do need somewhere to live.
They do, and of course the Naki is the place. His name's Mark Belchamber. He's sitting opposite me here in our Auckland studio tonight. Mark, good evening.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, lovely to have you. So look, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? Where are you born?
So I was born in the north of England in a place called Darlington. Stayed there for about 3 years and then went down south with my parents and lived there for a further 38 years. And then in 2005 came to New Zealand and set up life here.
What brought you to New Zealand in 2005?
In 2000, we did a lot of travelling from the UK, and in 2000 we went to Alaska in Canada, and Alaska is just the most beautiful place on earth, with New Zealand running a close second, obviously. And we turned to each other and said, why do we confine ourselves to one place in the world for our entire lives? Let's go and explore. So you had to either be a teacher, which was my wife, or a paramedic, which was me, and English speaking. And we applied for anywhere, and New Zealand was what came up.
Fantastic. So paramedicine, being a paramedic, that's a pretty hardcore job. How did you, and this is obviously why he lives in Taranaki, Kyle.
Again, makes sense.
Because if you're going to be...
if you're hardcore, you must have a lot of accidents, so they probably need paramedics.
Oh, this is true. So look, how did you get into being a paramedic? Where did that part of your story start?
It was accidentally, really. I did a huge, like most kids nowadays, I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do when I grew up. I went through school and kept doing exams and passing them, so I did more exams and eventually ran out of luck at university and went and worked for a shop, and then I was a motorcycle courier in London, and I was a salesman and rubbish at it, and I did all sorts of real dumb jobs and knew that 9 to 5 wasn't my gig. And someone I knew was a paramedic, and I thought, well, I'll try for the police and the paramedics, and I'll try for the fire and see if someone says yes. And London were taking, at that point, about 400 people a year on, and they weren't too picky, and I managed to get in on the back of that.
So what year was this? When did you start your paramedic training?
Well, prior to that, I was actually driving south of London in a place called Surrey from 1993 to 1995, just driving people around, getting to know the ropes. Then I joined London in 95 and did 10 years in London, which was a massive proving ground. It's one of the busiest ambulance stations in the world, one of the busiest ambulance services in the world. And you just get everything thrown at you. And of course, because it's London, there's a lot of research there. You've got a huge amount of hospitals that you can do different learning in. I loved it. And
Tell me, London is a place to be a paramedic.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got all that stuff happening, and of course, it's one of the great, giant metropolises of the world. Was it exciting?
I guess when you live there, you take it for granted. Yeah, it is pretty exciting. And like I said, there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of new research, a lot of new ideas come through. And you get a chance to be first on the line for those things. But yeah, it was exciting. And I love I love driving through dense traffic and treating people and being a difference to people. And so I guess you can do that anywhere in the world, but London's a pretty special city.
And I suppose with that becoming exciting and that thrill, does it become addictive?
I think it does become part of who you are. I think you have to be very careful that the job doesn't define you, because when you leave the job, you have nothing to go to. So you have to make sure you know who you are and that you are confident in yourself. But yeah, it does become addictive, and you do kind of think, actually, this is a pretty cool job. And even now, you go through large windows that are reflective, and you look at yourself and you think, oh yeah, it's pretty cool.
All right, well, we're going to talk more about this and some of the other challenges that go with being a paramedic, which is of course why Mark's with us tonight. Our guest tonight, Mark Belchamber. He'll continue to be with us here in the studio after the break.
Nutters Club, now on Newstalk ZB.
Welcome back to the show. My name's Hamish, Coleman-Ross. In the studio with me tonight, psychotherapist Kyle McDonald, and our guest, paramedic Mark Belchamber. So Mark, you're just telling us about having started up this really exciting career after having kind of wandered in and out of a few other different roles, and particularly one of the most exciting places to be a paramedic in London, and a decade worth of it. I mean, you must have just had some incredible experiences, but I think that's the point, isn't it, is that the experiences you have as a paramedic can be quite varying. And I guess, for people who perhaps don't have a good picture of what being a paramedic is, I mean, you're dealing with people who have had sometimes quite serious accidents, correct?
Oh, yeah. It is literally a random job. You go to people who are seriously unwell. You go to people who have severed limbs. You go to people who have tried to hurt themselves successfully. You go to pretty much anything that can go wrong, you get called to it. And you can go from a bomb scare to a toothache to a serious cardiac event to a diabetic event and then to a major trauma on the roads. And you literally, sometimes it just doesn't let up. And you just go from one job to the next and do your job.
What kind of effect does it have on a person?
I think it depends on the person. In the early days, I think you kind of think, yep, this is cool, and you want to get out and do the jobs and have the experiences and build the experience up. I developed from sort of a baby paramedic through to a minor manager, through to a training officer, and I've had a fairly decent career in London. But I think the more you do it, there are little bits that stay with you, and they just become overstayers sometimes. And I don't think there's anyone who does a job like I do, and not just me, other emergency services as well, who you do it for long enough and little bits of detritus begin to stick, and you don't realise they're sticking, but they do stick. And you have to make sure that they don't become damaging.
Did any of it become damaging to you?
I've done this since 1993, including learning the ropes. So I don't know how many years that is, something 25, 30, something like that. I fell over totally. I essentially had so many, I describe them as shards of glass. So little shards of glass stick in you and you don't realise they're there, but they each compound, and you little one, another one, and you don't realise they're compounding until one day that final tiny piece of glass hits you and you just explode. And that happened to me in, I think, 2018, and I fell over completely.
Talk us through. We'll go back a few steps. So you did your 10 years in London, and then, you thought, hey, why confine yourself to one place? So you immigrated to New Zealand. So look, talk us through that. You came here and you picked up a job as a paramedic here in New Zealand.
So the reason we got the points on the visa to get here is because what was then the Taranaki District Health Board had offered me a job, and they gave me enough points to get here, along with a few other bits and pieces. So yes, I walked straight into a job with what was the Taranaki District Health Board. and it is now St John in Taranaki.
So London to Taranaki. I know Taranaki is the home of the hardcore, but it's a little different, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can't really compare the two. I got far too involved in London. It was pretty much taken over my life. I mean, there were conversations between my wife and I as, when am I actually going to see you again? And it was time, yes, to explore the rest of the world, but also to just say, hang on a minute, this is dominating me. I want to move right away from everything I was involved in, go back on the road and just be a paramedic again. And so Taranaki, New Zealand was a fresh start, and maybe getting some work-life balance back.
And I think that's important, isn't it, Kyle?
Yeah, it is. And so I was just interested in the way that you sort of started to explain how you felt that essentially the trauma sort of accumulated from the beginning, like little shards of glass.
Yeah.
And everyone has their threshold, right? I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah, and it's very, very individual. And some people will never recognise they have those shards of glass because you become bitter and negative and twisted and cynical, and that's your way of saying, actually, this is not affecting me.
Yeah.
But it is affecting you. You just don't know it yet.
Just shut your empathy.
Yeah, you do. I freely admit I'm actually quite a soft character, so I know I get affected by stuff. But I guess, the vast majority of us in this profession genuinely care about our patients.
Of course.
And so you care for someone, you open yourself up, you open that vulnerability up.
So how do people within the circles of paramedics, how did you kind of cope with it? I mean, I've done ride-alongs with cops and they just sit there and crack the most inappropriate jokes when the windows are rolled up. So, how do paramedics cope with it all?
I think emergency services humour is all pretty similar. There is this dark, what they call gallows humour or black humour, and it is a diversion. It's I don't want to deal with this, and therefore I will just joke about it. I mean, if it's affecting you personally, then maybe you go home and have just one drink too many, or you just take one codeine too many, or you divert yourself some other way. But people, it's very individual how people deal with it. But the classic way in a group is to put on a bravado and to just to joke along and laugh along. And I knew when I was doing the black humour, inside it was hurting, but I knew outside I couldn't show that.
Okay, well, when we come back, we'll talk about how it did affect you and how you tried to cope with it. So we'll come to that part. Our guest tonight, Mark Belchamber, paramedic from Taranaki, here live from our Auckland studio tonight on the Nutters Club. Back soon.
This is the Nutters Club, thanks to New Zealand On Air on Newstalk ZB.
Welcome back to the show. My name's Hamish Coleman-Ross. In the studio tonight, psychotherapist Kyle McDonald and our guest, paramedic Mark Belchamber. So, Mark, we're talking about, the gallows humour and being able to find a way to deflect, but at the same time, and I mean, Kyle, you can probably jump in here with me, that this is a coping mechanism we do, but it doesn't necessarily solve the problem, does it? I mean, whatever it is that we've gone through, the experience is what I mean.
Oh, look, I mean, if we want to get really technical, we'd call it a defence, right? And the thing with any defence is they're great. They work, whether it's laughing or denying or pushing something away. The problem is if we rely on it too much and don't actually take the time to process whatever's going on. Laughing in the face of death is actually a pretty fine way to cope with it. But as long as we also make room for the feelings at some point.
And so things can manifest in different ways when we're trying to cope with that. What did those look like for you, Mark? Because it was over a period of time that, things cascaded for you. So what were some of the other things that were happening for you? What was that behaviour manifesting like?
Well, I think hindsight's a wonderful thing. So it's important to say that I didn't recognise it. I do now. But when my second daughter was born, I've discovered that I was completely unsupportive, really, to the rest of my family, certainly my wife. And I thought I was being completely reasonable, but what I was doing was I realised now, but I didn't realise then, was that the emotions and the way I was dealing with calls or not dealing with calls was taking up space in my head. So I didn't then have space for the normal functioning that I should have had in life because I was protecting myself. You definitely sleep less. You begin to get nightmares. You begin to, in the later stages, for me, it was, you'd lie awake at night and you'd think, what am I going to next? Or what am I going to deal with? Am I going to go to that because I don't want to go to that? And before I totally went off the rails, I was driving slowly to jobs in the hope that I would either get cancelled or someone else would get there before me. My heart rate would go through the roof. I would be really emotional before or after. Things that would normally, I don't want to use the word normal, things that someone who has dealt with stuff wouldn't affect them, they actually affected me really badly. There were certain things on the television I couldn't watch, and it wasn't all death and gore. There was some stuff you just look at it and it would suddenly twist you somehow, and yeah, you began to realise that something was wrong. But it took a long time because this gradual build-up of sleeplessness and lack of ability to think about other people and the increased selfishness, and you isolate yourself slightly more. I think you probably, depending on who you are, you either become far, far, far more attached to your friends or you isolate from your friends. I actually isolated because I was I was eventually diagnosed with PTSD. And that's a really selfish disease. And you don't realise that it's selfish when you're having it. But I was selfish. And so I was totally insular.
When you isolate yourself, and this is, I guess, a question for you as well, Kyle, when we isolate ourselves in this, does this also prevent anybody else being able to potentially see that we might need help?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's a really good description that actually what happens is we become so preoccupied with what's going on for ourselves that there isn't really much space for anything else. And I often talk to people in my office about the idea that post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is essentially like an emotional indigestion. So, how we understand about how this happens is that when people experience something that exceeds their capacity to cope with it emotionally, and you can see immediately from that definition, that's that we can define that individually, right? So one person might cope with something fine, the person standing next to them might be completely overwhelmed by it. So we can't necessarily define what is traumatic until we know what the person's response to it is. And when we experience something that overwhelms our capacity to cope, then we kind of switch off. We stop processing the emotion and the memory in the normal way. And it kind of gets stuck like the shards of glass, right? It gets like an emotional indigestion, which we then, to be able to actually process, we have to build up our capacity to deal with the emotions to the point where we can then digest the memory again, right? And if we get an accumulation of those things, then it can end up in a post-traumatic stress disorder with a whole bunch of things that we're stuck on in our mind, whether it be through flashbacks, nightmares, or intrusive memories, and are working day to day to actually cope with, even though we may not be in a traumatic situation at all. We could just be lying on a beach.
So you were going through this, Mark. You were starting to isolate. You were, driving slowly. You were feeling emotional before jobs. The sleeplessness. Did anybody pick anything else up? Even the fact that you were isolating, or
No.
did you have everyone? You had everyone fooled.
No, I hid it very, very well, and I desperately feel for Robin Williams, who, he committed suicide, and the first thing everyone says was, he was such a funny guy. How could he be like that? And I kind of think he must have just been hiding so much. And I also hid so much. I mean, back to what Carl said, all of the above, flashback, nightmares, the avoidance. And the avoidance is actually quite... I'll come back to what you said.
That's right.
The avoidance is actually quite important because if you avoid whatever you're not dealing with, your brain is telling you that actually avoidance is the correct way of dealing with it. So you build it up in your head and then you avoid it. And because you don't face it, you build it up on your head. And there's this kind of, you're reinforcing in your mind that you're doing the right thing, because avoiding it means you don't face it. I said, sorry, Kyle, it's a very amateur way of,
No, it's
of
perfect.
explaining.
And you're right, it's natural, right? I mean, the first thing we do when we see something frightening is we run away.
Yeah.
We avoid it.
And you know, so for me, it got to the stage where what I was seeing, you know, I would look down after sports in my car, and I would physically see my own leg broken. I would drive past dead possums on the driveway, and I would see dead bodies. I would hallucinate, and this is you know, this is just no alcohol, no drugs. This is just me somehow manifesting whatever's in my head. That's what my brain is telling me. That's how my brain is dealing with it. Sorry, what was your initial question?
It's fine, don't worry about it. We've moved on. Okay, so look, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, we'll talk about what ended up happening in 2018, because this is when all of the mask wearing, all of the hiding it from everybody, it came to a head for you.
It did.
Couldn't do it anymore. Okay, we're going to talk more with our guest, Mark Belchamber, here on the Nutters Club. Back soon.
Nutters Club, now on Newstalk ZB.
Welcome back to the show. My name's Hamish, Coleman-Ross, and in the studio with me, psychotherapist Kyle McDonald and our guest, paramedic Mark Belchamber. So, Mark, you know, at this point in your story, you've spent years at this for a long period of time being able to hide the effect of your job on you, right? And you talked about at the start of the show little pieces of glass and building up. What became the breaking point for you in 2018, and what did that look like?
I don't know what the breaking point was in 2018. I think I just couldn't do it anymore. The breaking point was several years earlier. I remember a specific call, and I remember, I can still remember all about the call, and I think something broke in me. Now, there's a couple of calls in my career prior to that where I think that's really hurt. That's really, really hurt. But there was one in Taranaki that really hurt. But it was 7, 8, 9 years beyond that I kept going. But I knew that something wasn't right. And I think it just accumulated. And sometime late in 2018, I remember going, I can't do this anymore. I would be awake the night before worrying about going to work. I would then get through the first, because we do two days, 2 nights, 4 off. So I'd then do the 2-day shifts and think, right, I've got hold of that. The swing shift, the day between the day and the night, you'd kind of worry about what you go. And then overnight, you'd be worrying, I've got through that night shift, only one more night shift to go. One more night shift, you do that night shift, you go home the following morning, you think, right, 4 days off. By the whole of that 4 days off, you're thinking, I've got to go back in 4 days. What am I going to get? And that just wears you down. You can't do it anymore. And what the trigger was, and I was obviously being a right toad at home. And I have, I don't know if she's listening, but, my wife is just the most amazing person and my best friend. And she said to me, do you think we need to spend some time apart? And that was like someone smacked me around the ear holes with a sledgehammer. It was like, we just don't have those conversations. It's not all sweetness and light. I mean, she's a half Irish redhead. We have our moments, but we love each other desperately, and we're best friends. And she said, we should take some time apart. And I thought, I'm in trouble. I'm in real trouble. And I went and saw my doctor, and he said, I think you've got PTSD. You need 2 weeks off. And I said, I can't take 2 weeks off. Work need me. Because I'm the highest qualified and there aren't many of us, and so I would leave a big gap in the roster. And so the kind of duty calls, and you think I can't let work down. And but anyway, I took the 2 weeks off, and then the whole of the 2 weeks I was worrying about going back.
Yeah.
And so I spoke to my boss and said, look, I need a little bit more time. He said, right, have another 2 weeks. And then that entire 2 weeks I was worried. And it just got worse and worse and worse. And essentially, I just didn't go back. Not for 18 months or so. the fear, the anxiety. I would have dreams where I'd physically recoil off the pillow and wake myself up. I would have the most violent nightmares. I would not be able to see people. I couldn't deal with. It's from what Carl said earlier about having space. There was just no space left in my head. I was spending so much effort surviving. I had no space for anything or anyone else.
During that 18 months, did you have any kind of professional help, any therapy?
So ACC have an interesting philosophy. Essentially, they will support you if you have a one-off event, so a specific traumatic event, but a long-standing or ongoing trauma, such as, accumulation of PTSD, they won't touch. I knew all those years ago of the one job that broke me in Taranaki, so I put it down to that. ACC sent me some paperwork and I filled that in. They essentially contacted me 3 times between the November and the February and said, we need more time, and I never heard from them again. And so it took them... I basically got fed up, and I wrote to the Herald and said, can I please print an open letter to ACC? You've left me hanging for 6 months. Please, can you do your job? Anyway, a reporter by the name of Anna Leask, she changed literally my journey, and thank you to her. She did a full front page on the Herald in the June, and within 2 hours I got a phone call from ACC saying, okay, we'll come to the party. So after I was 6 months on my own, and then I got a clinical psychologist for another 9 months, and that was the difference. That was the difference. I couldn't have done it on my own. Ambulance services have their own internal employee assistance programs. Yep. And these people are brilliant, but they're not equipped to deal with the level of damage that I had.
Yeah, it's quite specialised.
Yeah. So, that's, I think all ambulance services are doing their best with the evolving situation with how staff in the emergency services and ambulance services are suffering, and it's an emerging body of evidence, but it's nowhere near what I needed.
Kyle, why is that? Why is it so specialised for treating PTSD?
Well, because I think that when we think about mental health, we commonly think about what we kind of think of as symptomatic presentations, right? Depression, anxiety, mood disorders, the things that people turn up and say this is wrong. But what we know about post-traumatic stress disorder is that actually it's really, the good news is, if you're out there and you're listening, and this sounds like you, the good news is it's really treatable, but it needs to be treated in the right way. And what often happens is that people, who don't have experience in the area tend to want to dive straight into it. Whereas actually we know that actually you need to spend quite a bit of time setting up some safety, setting up people with skills that's going to help them manage, and then work your way once the relationship is set up through processing whatever is the indigestion, the emotional indigestion. So it is specialised, and it shouldn't take a very lovely reporter from the New Zealand Herald to get people clinical treatment. The thing about ACC is, it's hit and miss, right? But and we've talked about this on the show before, actually. The way that the legislation is written for ACC really does put them in a bind, because actually clinically it doesn't make much sense. What we know about post-traumatic stress disorder is actually the thing that predicts the traumatic outcome of a traumatic event is previous experience of trauma. So actually it's always an accumulation. So we know, for instance, that people who've experienced trauma in childhood are more susceptible to PTSD in adulthood. We know with sexual violence that people who have experienced sexual abuse are more likely to develop PTSD if they experience sexual violence as an adult. So there's lots of things that set you up for it. It's always an accumulation. So clinically, the idea that someone is walking along whistling a happy tune and then one thing happens and bang, they fall over, just doesn't really line up with reality.
Okay, well, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, it's time for your phone calls as well. Give us a bell. 0800 80 10 80 is the number. If you've got your own experience perhaps with PTSD, or maybe a friend or family member that you know might be suspected of being suffering from it. You know, Mark's talked about how well he managed to hide it. Is that something that, you know, you might have seen in yourself or in others around you? And especially if you're someone who's been through it yourself, what was it that worked for you? How did you get through? We'd love to hear those stories tonight. We'll continue our chat with Mark after the break here on the Nutters Club.
The Nutters Club on Newstalk ZB.
Welcome back to the show. My name's Hamish, Coleman-Ross, and in the studio with us tonight, psychotherapist Kyle McDonald and our guest tonight, paramedic Mark Belchamber, talking about PTSD. And we welcome you calls on this now. 0800 80 10 80 is the number. And of course, you can text us at ZB 9292 if you like. On that, I've got a text message here. It says, hey, I have CPTSD.
Yeah, it's complex post-traumatic stress disorder.
Okay, cool. Brilliant. It says, I can't control my alters from switching.
So that's a reference to dissociative identity disorder.
Okay.
What used to be known as multiple personality disorder.
Okay. And it says, I see people after me and I injured myself from battling the alters. Not many people around me get me. I hurt, but my alters don't get me. So go get checked because they feel people will not get them. It's from Rebel. Thanks very much, Rebel. So what's the difference then with the CPTSD?
So complex post-traumatic stress disorder is I guess we could call it an unofficial diagnosis. It's not in the DSM-5, but there's a huge amount of supportive literature behind it. It's essentially a diagnosis that refers to the particular kind of symptoms people develop if they experience trauma throughout their emotional development in childhood. So it effectively trauma influences the kind of person you grow up to be. And dissociative identity disorder, or alters, so that's the idea that there are different parts of the person inside themselves that they may not remember time when they're experiencing themselves as that person, is one of those not very common but very real outcomes of sustained childhood trauma. So,
what were some of the coping mechanisms that you must have developed during your counselling and things, Mark? I mean, what was it that you ended up being able to do apart from just having time away from the job for a start?
Yeah.
What were some of the things that you developed for yourself?
A lot of it, what my Victoria, my clinical psychologist, she essentially talked to me, and I was thinking what Carl says about you can't just go wham bam, thank you ma'am. You have to build up a trust, build up a rapport, work out the rules, work out a trust level, and then go into the real nitty gritty. And Victoria took time to do that. And we went through the calls, and the ones that I hadn't dealt with, the ones that plagued me, the ones that haunted me. And I think coping mechanisms depend on why you personally aren't dealing with the calls, whether it's historical with you, whether it's stuff that you yourself have suffered, whether it's fears from your childhood. With me, a lot of it was if I couldn't do something for a family, I kind of blame myself. I tried to be... sounds terrible. I almost tried to be God. Why can't I fix this? Why can't I be this person they need me to be? I really, really struggled when other humans, when you hear the absolute desperate howl of someone who is completely desolate, something inside your soul just gets hit, and I hated it. And it's kind of, how do I not deal with that anymore? How do I? And you have to. For me, part of it was saying you're not in control. The things that people.
Sorry there, guys. Just got some music coming through.
The things that people do are not my responsibility, and sometimes maybe I try to take on too much of what they were doing and saying, well, actually, I have to fix this. Sometimes I can't fix it, and I have to be okay with that. I'm not responsible for what other people choose to do to themselves.
It's a tough but vital thing to accept, isn't it? That actually we can't control as much as we think we can.
Yeah, and I think also there's this thing. I'm a professional. I can't be sad about it. I can't. I can't cry about it. I can't. But now on the job, obviously you can't fall and break down, but it's okay at the end of it to say I need 5 minutes. And one of the problems with emergency services is if there's another call to go to, you don't get a chance to stand down. You have to go to the next thing, and so you don't get a chance to look at it and work it through. You actually taking a concrete pill is not the answer. And sometimes someone will say, "Oh, just harden up," and that's not. You can't harden up. It's not a choice. It's not something that you can make sure that that won't affect me again. Some of it for me was a change in outlook and a change in emphasis in what my role was and wasn't, where I could and couldn't help, acknowledging that I needed time, acknowledging that I didn't have to deal with everything. It was interesting because when I fell over, everyone said to me, "But you're Mark, you're a senior paramedic. You have tremendous amounts of experience. You've done all this stuff. You back us up. How come you're not dealing with it?" And the most important part of my journey was that I gave other people permission to not be okay.
So what I was going to ask is if it was well recognised within the services that that this is an effect, that this happens to people.
No one knew it was happening to me. When it happened to me, as I say, it was a genuine surprise to people. But once it happened, a lot of people, a frightening number of people, came to me and said, "Actually, now you've said that, I feel this. I'm medicating, I'm drinking, I'm doing other stuff." And people, I'm not going to say too much, but people who I know, but also people who I've never met before, have come to me with some real horror stories. And would I have chosen my journey? Absolutely not. But can my journey do some good? I really hope so.
We'll be back soon here with more of your calls and texts on the Nutters Club.
This is the Nutters Club, thanks to New Zealand On Air on Newstalk ZB.
Previously on the Nutters Club, we were joined by Mark Belchamber. Originally from England, Mark had done a series of jobs in the late 80s, early 90s, none of which he thought he was particularly good at. But then, with an influx of recruiting for paramedics in the jolly old town of London, that's right, London, UK, he managed to find a job as a paramedic, where he then spent the next better part of 10 years. Pretty exciting job, cutting edge of paramedicine in many ways. But he decided after 10 years that him and his wife wanted just a little bit of a change of scenery, something different. So they moved to the home of the hardcore, aka Taranaki, where he managed to pick up another job there as a paramedic. His wife, by the way, is a teacher, which, as you know, considering mine is as well, is some kind of weird sentencing. But either way, there he was, paramedic in Taranaki. But it was all the little things that kind of build up with a job like that. Sometimes you don't get to choose what you're going out to attend, and it can be everything from young people to elderly to some pretty graphic call-outs. And it took a toll on Mark, but he was very good. He wore the mask. He hid it from everybody. Nobody could tell that Mark was perhaps actually really suffering from the effects of the job. But eventually it came to a head, and he needed to find a way to deal with it, and ended up just taking some time off from work. And then after a little bit of a battle with ACC and a bit of helping hand from the fine folk at the New Zealand Herald, he managed to get some counselling services, and it has been working wonders for him. So he's here still with us talking about the effects of PTSD how it affects us and the support and coping mechanisms that we can have there. Mark, it's wonderful that you've continued to stay with us, and thank you very much for sharing your story with us in the first hour.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Any tips there for anybody else listening, for people if they're dealing with ACC? I mean, I guess you can do what Mark's done and, give Annalise a call at the Herald.
That's an option. But actually, ACC under sensitive claims do have the option to fund social work support. And I guess, the idea behind that, and also a number of agencies that work around the country, NGOs who help people get back into the workforce. Because we know that having a structure to your day and to your week and having a meaningful thing to do when you get out of bed in the morning is really important. Doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's meaningful to you, and actually doing that in a way that's often gradual and staged and supported is the best way to ensure success. So I'd encourage you to check with your case manager about whether you're eligible for that social work support. And if not, the other option is to hook up with some of those agencies. The big ones, Pathways and Merge, they tend to have workplace support that can get people back into the workplace.
This one's from Jill. And I think this is just sort of like in relation to emergency services market. It just says, my husband was a volunteer fireman in a small country brigade in Hawke's Bay. None of them had any experience in dealing with trauma, but the fire service changed the parameters and his brigade became first responders to accidents on the Napier-Taupo Road and the Napier-Wairoa Road. They attended so many horrific fatal accidents. His occupation was a nurseryman, so this was way out of his comfort zone. There was no hope available to them, only for permanent firemen. We saw him change. My children, who are now adults, often talk about how difficult he became after attending a fatal accident. Yeah. He died at 64. Looking back, we wish he had resigned from the brigade, but he was one of those men who helped whenever he could.
Yeah, I mean, my heart goes out to you. It's interesting. Volunteers are an issue in and of themselves because they are, by definition, not professionally paid. They are there because they want to support their community, and they have my absolute respect for doing that job, but they don't sometimes have access to the same support systems, and I think that's something that the brigades, not just the brigades, but I think what the employers need to say, that professionals who are paid and the volunteers go to the same things and have the same issues. And if anything, volunteers will be affected more because they don't go back to a station and banter with their mates. They'll probably go back to their jobs. I know, right, sitting here right now, I know that my relationship with my eldest daughter has suffered significantly as a result of the way I have responded to my PTSD. And so, yeah, I mean, I tragic story for that caller, and I wish them all the best.
And I think that's the thing that we understand too, is that the people who are doing these services, yourself, Mark, and Jill's husband, people are doing it for all the right reasons. They want to help. Yeah. They want to be there when things go bad. They want to be there to try and make it better.
And volunteers especially are, they will do it because they are part of a community and they want to support that community. And, absolutely, as I say, heroes, all of them. But they need the same level of support as anyone doing the job, paid or unpaid, needs that same level of support.
Okay, you could argue in some ways that volunteers need more.
Yeah, yep, I wouldn't disagree.
Yeah.
Okay, I got another text message here. Hey, Mark, bang on the money. I'm in St John and have PTS, and I threw myself more and more into the job not to deal with stuff at home. 3 years on, I'm doing a lot better with coping with a good therapist. It's from Tanya.
Excellent, Tanya. Pleased to hear it. If you want to look at on the St John website, you'll see my PTSD journey, and there's also, interestingly, PTSD journey of how it affects the family, and you'll be able to track that down if you just simple Google search on the simple search on the St John website. But yeah, I'm pleased you're making good progress.
Okay, this one. Mark, you're in trouble on this one. Mark, you made me tear up. Recently, I needed an ambulance, an ambulance first response. One medic came first to be greeted with a bawling mess because I knew I had sepsis following kidney surgery. 10 minutes late, two crew ambulances arrived. One was wiping my tears and holding my hand while another inserted IV. Listening to you got me thinking how many times a day a paramedic would give so much of themselves to assure a patient. The ambo crew called back to see me when they brought another patient into ED. Only heroes can do this job, Mark. And that's from C.
Well, I really appreciate the sentiment. I really don't like the whole hero and that kind of thing. I'm not a hero. I'm just doing a job that I happen to be quite good at.
Sounds like something a hero would say, doesn't it, Colin?
No, it really isn't. But it goes back to what I said earlier on in the show. We do actually care for our patients. We want to make a difference, and when we don't, it's disappointing. And so, going back, seeing you doing it a little bit over the top, that's just kind of what we do, because we do care for our patients. Hope you're on the mend.
And of course, whilst I appreciate your humility, the thing is about, I think when people start to talk about these kinds of roles as heroes, they're actually recognising the exceptional nature of the job, right? They're actually recognising that there are things that people put themselves in harm's way emotionally or physically to do, which we know, for some, has the consequences we're talking about tonight.
Yeah, it is a job that has costs.
Yeah.
There are a number of Christmases where I've had to work the entire Christmas because that's my job. I've not been able to go on holiday with my family because I've had to be on call, and there are definite costs to what we do. But without wanting to sound melodramatic, I have literally stopped people from dying. I have literally saved lives. I have literally prevented people from getting worse. That's not something you can say every day, and that's kind of what you call job satisfaction, I suppose.
Tell me about that job satisfaction. When you do that, like what kind of feeling does that elate for you?
There's just something inside that glows. You just kind of think, actually, I've done an okay job. I'm quite pleased, and I bore you from here till next week's show with the jobs I've done. But when you do a really good job, or even if you just do a little job, if it's just helping a little old lady, you go away and you think, actually, I've affected the world for a little bit of the better. And I've actually, there's enough negativity in this world. I've brought some positivity into the world, and I see that as part of my calling. It is a calling. It's a calling. But not only. Also, in my job, in my career as a manager, as a training officer, as a support, as a mentor, I've not only affected the public, I've also affected my colleagues, and hopefully I've affected them for the better as well. And so it's about bringing some good back, for me, anyway.
Yeah, I think I understand it. There's enough... I think we can say the word. There's enough crap in the world and things that go wrong. It's nice to be part of something where you feel like you made it go a little bit better than it was a few moments ago, especially when it comes to something, as critical as life and death.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess this is the thing I always think about our work, and even here on the radio show, we sort of say, oh, well, nobody died, but sometimes that's not true. We actually have been able to affect on this show, I know, and, the only reason that we know we've been able to help people, and we have been told that we've saved people's lives is because they've told us. And it's quite humbling.
Yeah. And it's very easy to say, well, this job's important, this job's not. I think, the world revolves around us all doing our jobs to the best of our ability. And it doesn't matter whether you're, the person that cleans my hotel room for the next person or the leader of the free world. We're all doing a job, and if you do it to the best of our ability. And that's partly why, you say that this show has helped save lives. It's why I'm being as honest as I am now. If I can give someone out there the permission to say, I'm not okay, if I can make a difference to even more, maybe more than one person out there tonight and say, actually, it's time to turn around and look for some help, then I've played a little part in helping your show achieve its goal.
John, good morning.
Yes, hi all three of you. I was just ringing up, it just intrigued me, the conversation at the moment, because I'm a 53-year-old man, and I had a traumatic experience when I was 14, and I don't want to go there, but how it affected me through my whole life was suffering in silence. And I've pulled through life, but I took what happened to me at 14 years old. I was quite an academically high person, and I love my sport and that. And when this incident happened, I shut up. I shut down and kept it secret because it was an embarrassing thing. And at 14, I changed, and all I wanted to do was hate the world, and it drew me to a bad side of life. So if you can understand, my parents never knew. They just thought, oh, okay, he's hit puberty, he's gone down the wrong side of the tracks, but they didn't realise what had happened. And my whole life was being attracted to the wrong side of life, and most of my life has been of letdowns, but I've never ever been able to complete one thing in my life. But if anyone's listening, don't give up.
One of the things that we know, particularly with, any trauma really, is once we can find a way to talk about it, we've already overcome enough of the shame to start things actually moving. And you know, what you're saying about an incident like that overwhelms you and is traumatic happening at that age is really tough. You know, we know that when kids are developing and trauma happens, it can, as you've sort of really described, how it can really derail things because we're still trying to figure out the world. And if it can really derail how our personality develops, how our emotions develop, and how we engage with the world.
I'm starting off again at 15. I've got a bit of my life still ahead of me, a lot of my life ahead of me, and I'm starting to achieve things that I never used to. I used to fail. I didn't fail. I gave up on everything I tried, and I was just. And if anyone argued with me, I'd just put my wall up and make some sort of scene to divert the real issue.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think your and my experiences are probably different. Sorry, I forgot your name, but I think you're
John.
John. Sorry, John.
Hi, Mark.
Yeah, I think you obviously had an experience that is very personal as you.
It destroyed me.
Absolutely. I had a different experience, and I think just to follow on from that, it's really important to say that it doesn't matter what the trauma was, whether it was too much seeing in war, whether it was a physical assault, a sexual assault, something like what I've gone through, whether it was a horrific accident of some description. It doesn't matter what the cause of your PTSD is. The way the brain responds is I'm happy to be corrected by Carl on this, but the way the brain responds is fairly predictable and fairly consistent. So the circumstances surrounding your PTSD are one thing, but the symptoms are pretty much the same, and it's fear and stuff etching itself in your head, and vivid dreams and irrationality and flashbacks and hallucinations and avoidance and sleeplessness and anger and worry and fear and being removed or not present. I remember going to a job where I literally had an out-of-body experience. I watched myself treat a patient from afar, and that's a way of your brain it's a self-protective mechanism. And whatever you go through, it doesn't matter how you got there, the brain will respond in a fairly predictable way. So if anyone's out there and says, well, you don't understand what I'm going through, no, I don't understand what you've been through, but I absolutely get where your brain's going to go with it. Is that reasonable, Kyle?
Yeah, it is, and I guess then the only proviso I'd add to that is when we know when trauma happens in our development, it can influence things in terms of how we react to relationships across our life. particularly if the trauma has occurred in a relationship, whether that be sexual abuse or physical violence from family or parents or others. I think that for a lot of people, that's the complex bit, right? So, often people who end up in therapy who've experienced trauma in childhood find that they can't have relationships with other people in the same way because what they become afraid of is closeness with other people.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Thanks for the call, John. We're going to keep rocking and rolling here. We'll take a break, actually. When we come back, I've got Mark and Lynn. Back soon.
It's Overnight Talk on Newstalk ZB.
Welcome back to the show. We'll go straight back to the lines. Lynn, good morning.
Oh, yes, it is morning.
It is, isn't it? We've made it. Congratulations.
I quite often listen to another show, but I did enjoy listening to Mark because I was a volunteer ambulance officer back in the day, and I ended up getting burnt out with it all, Mark.
Yeah. Where were you? Or can you not say?
Did not say.
Okay, no worries.
I had some big jobs.
Yeah.
And got quite traumatised by it all. Just like you, post-traumatic stress disorder, and that. So it was my passion in my life. It's still my passion. I can't do it now. I'm too old.
Yeah.
It was my passion, and I loved it. But the burnout, and you don't get the much support back then. When I was doing it.
No, I think all ambulance services are still discovering just what a beast it is, and it's going to be continuously. I think it's going to be on the agenda because it's a big unwieldy thing that we're still discovering. But yeah, I mean, if you've had some help, that's great. If you haven't, and those jobs are still visiting you, it might be time to go and just talk to your doctor and see what options there are for you.
Yeah, I've had a lot of trauma in my life. But one thing is, last year with lockdown, this is a horrible story I'm going to tell you. Not that I'm trying to offend anybody, but my son, he came up to my house and lost the plot and decided to do everything, try and hang himself in front of me. So I'm still quite affected by that, It's just a horrible thing that happened, but I if anything happens, I just shake. I just get the shakes.
And Lynn, have you had any counselling or support for that? Because that is a horrific experience for anyone to have to go through.
Well, they sent me, victim support. They were useless, sorry, I'm nothing against them, but...
No, I get it. It doesn't always work, the way everyone intends it to. Hey, Lynn.
Yes?
You're a wonderful person for having, done what you've done and what you've been through. I'd like you to do something for me if you don't mind. Could you give another chance to have a chat to someone, because I think it would be potentially really good for you, and a good number to call to be able to kind of give that a crack is 1737. So it's the free phone number. And
1737.
That's it. Yeah, it's not an 0800 number. It's still free. It sounds like it shouldn't work, but it does.
Yeah.
Give them a call. They're really, really good, and they've also got a lot of connections, resources and stuff. No matter where in New Zealand you are, they're just like a really good portal. But they are actually trained counsellors in the first instance. Yeah. Because I think what you've gone through. Don't underestimate it, and I think that's probably the motto, the story from tonight's show is don't understate it. Don't think you'll be all fine. You don't have to be fine. You don't have to take the concrete pill like Mark said. So give them a call and just see if having a chat with them doesn't kind of help you out a bit, because you know what? You deserve it, Lynn.
No, not about that. I just kind of... It's been very rough when you look back on, just like Mark... some of the jobs I went to were just quite horrific too, Yeah,
absolutely. But, you've put yourself out there as a volunteer for other people. It's time for you to put yourself first. I've told you off now. There you go. You didn't think that was going to happen, did you?
Oh, thank you, Mark.
No, thank you. Thanks for your service. Thanks for volunteering. It's very valuable. Thank you.
Thank you for yours.
Okay, you go well, Lynn.
All right.
1737, that's the number, and that's the same for any of you listening. Great service. Quick question. This one's just coming on the text. Hi there, and it's just straight off the back of what Lynn said. Can you suffer PTSD from a loved one's suicide if you found them?
The short answer is absolutely yes. You can suffer PTSD from anything. I mean, and I don't say that glibly, because actually when we look at, again, what we talked about in the first hour, that PTSD is any experience that you find emotionally overwhelming that causes you to have heightened anxiety, re-experience it in some way, whether that be nightmares, flashbacks, or intrusive memories, and or cause some kind of emotional numbing or detachment, and persists for some time, then that's post-traumatic stress disorder. And of course, the more distressing the event, the more likely that memory is going to get stuck. So obviously something as horrific as a suicide of a family member, yeah, absolutely. Having said that, and I think this is important to say, not everybody who goes through an experience like that develops PTSD, which is different from finding an event distressing. Yeah. So finding an event distressing, we can have traumatic events that happen that we take some time, we get support, and we process emotionally, and we don't get stuck on. That's just distress. The key thing with PTSD is getting stuck, and as we've talked a lot about, ending up in a place where you are avoiding emotions, feelings, and experiences because of it.
Helena, good morning.
Hi, I spoke to you once before, but I've got a different thing I'm dealing with now. My mother died 5 years ago. This particular weekend, I rang Mum and I said, I can't come and see you because I've got no money because I did a taxi. It's on the other side of town. Well, I had $60. Now, that week, she died on the Tuesday, and I felt dreadful. I mean, I missed out on the last hug. I didn't go and see her when I should have gone. So I didn't go and see her, and I cried for weeks, and my brother said, look, don't beat yourself up. And my sister, you weren't meant to go there in the first place. Well, when she died that Tuesday, I just about lost it. I sort of, I should have gone, I didn't, and I had $60 to go.
Yeah. So what you're saying, Helena, is that you're just essentially still feeling a bit of guilt around that. That's what I'm hearing. Kyle, look, when we're dealing with things like guilt that's happened here, and here's the thing, Helena, by the way, I'm just going to say it, you weren't to know. It's not your fault.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the thing with grief is, and I think we have to be really alert to this whenever a grief happens, and obviously losing a parent's a big one, is that grief can get stuck. A little bit like what we're talking about with PTSD tonight, really. And so we have to be able to make sure that we're continuing to process the emotions. And I guess what I'm hearing is it's something that, understandably, Helene, you got a bit stuck on. I'd really encourage you to give 1737 a call and talk to someone about it, because when grief gets stuck, it can actually be a real problem. It can morph over time into depression, and we need to be able to work through these things often with somebody else to talk to.
Yeah, so do give that a go, Helena. And to be fair, it is horrific when these kind of things happen, but I'll say it again, wasn't your fault. You weren't to know. Thanks for the call. Let's go to Matthew. Good morning.
Good morning. I gone through PTSD and burnout. Just going through the stages of getting myself together, but listening to it and some of the things that have been said, I realised that I was numb by the time I was about 18, 19. I'm 40 now. The accumulation of traumatic events and then the burnout, it's realising what PTSD is. For me, it's the process of unravelling that, and also seeing how unacceptable it is to a lot of people around me. They just expect you to get over it and be normal. It can be a solitary journey.
Well, you talked about that, Mark, didn't you? You said, about the isolation.
Yeah, and I think it is a very, very lonely place to be, because you're on your own inside your head. And I think what this caller is saying about people not understanding is true, because there's kind of embarrassment because people don't know what to do. And I think if you know someone who you think's going through it, don't offer advice. Don't do the whole, what if I don't take the mickey out of you, it's because, then you should be worried. It's, don't make light of it. Ask questions. sit, listen, and be with that person, and that is the best help you can be. Don't try and offer that you won't have the solution. Your best thing to do is to sit and be, ask questions to understand, and say, look, I don't understand, but I'm here for you, and that's all you can do as a support, because the professionals do the work.
Yeah, and just to kind of to pick up there, Matthew, I would say a really good first stop, if you haven't already, is to, like we've said to the last three callers now, you're the third, give 1737 a call and let them know your situation. They can connect you to services and help, and they themselves are actually trained counsellors as well. So they're there to have a chat, and I know that they were up for that and happy to do so. Thanks for the call. Also, just quickly, we've had a text message come in about a charity called pilgrimbandits.co.nz. They were a charity that was established by a small group of Special Forces veterans in 2007. They're here in New Zealand with the sole aim of using their unique training and experience to help and inspire injured personnel to live life to the full.
Excellent.
So it's a bit of PTSD stuff going on there, a bit of support, I'm sure. Okay, Mark Belchamber, thank you so much for being our guest tonight.
Thank you.
It's been wonderful, and all the best for life in the hardcore land of the Taranaki.
Thanks very much.
Kyle McDonald, thank you.
Pleasure.
Jimmy and Boris, our producers, thank you. Thanks to Pip Hayes, who does our podcast. And, of course, thanks to you for listening. Forward to your company next week on The Nutters Club.
This is the Nutters Club, thanks to New Zealand On Air on Newstalk ZB.